Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com. Do you like the violin? I mean, really like the violin? Are you a violin maven? Well, for mavens, Eloquence has released 2 boxes containing the complete Decca and American Decca, which is now Deutsche Grammophon for some reason, recordings of Ruggiero Ricci, the remarkable Ruggiero Ricci, a virtuoso showman of the first rank. He recorded for various other labels too, including Vox, and he was quite the performer. You know, his original name was Woodrow Wilson Rich. That was his name. He was born in California, but his parents were Italian immigrants, which is why they named their kid Woodrow Wilson Rich. Only immigrants named their kids after American presidents like that. His brother was named something like George Washington Rich. So, you know, it was a musical family named after American presidents because his brother was a cellist. Really rather interesting. But he changed his name back to Ruggiero Ricci because in those days, he was born in 1918, you would do much better in the classical music world if you had a foreign sounding name. And if you were a violinist, of course, and it was an Italian name, it was even better. You know, it was perfect. And this was a common phenomenon. I mean, some of my favorites were Olga Samarov, who was or Samarova, whatever her name was. She was one of Stokowski's wives. You know, it's like the 6 wives of Henry VIII, the 5 dozen wives of Leopold Stokowski. Her real name, Olga Samarov, the pianist, was Lucy Hickenlooper, and she was from Texas. But Lucy Hickenlooper was obviously not going to have a great career as a classical pianist, and so she became Olga Samarov. Ooh, yeah. Much more impressive. I mean, it's even happened recently. Simon Bartow, the, guy who usually plays with Christoph Eschenbach and whatever, the pianist and bodybuilder thing. Well, his real name is Johnny Smith. He's from Florida. And his name is Johnny Smith. So Simon Bartow he became. So, Woodrow Wilson Smith became Ruggiero Ricci. And with that said, we can talk about these 2 boxes. Now, they really, how much you care about them really depends on, like I said, how much you love the violin, because there are wonderful, like, concerto performances, but there are also lots and lots of, sort of violin sniglets with piano accompaniment. And I must confess, I am not a violin maven. I really am not. I mean, I actually don't even like Bach's sonatas and partitas. I mean, I think a lot of people say they like them because they're by Bach and they feel they have to say that they like them. But in reality, I can only tolerate them in very small doses. You can recognize the greatness of the music without wanting to plonk it on every 5 minutes. And I know there are people who love it, and I leave it to them to love it. That's fine. It just ain't my cup of tea. Much as I am amazed at the virtuosity of the people who play them, and I think I can, generally tell the good ones from the bad ones. That's part of my professional duty. It's not my stuff for pleasure. And so Ricci is like that kind of a violinist. The problem with these sets, let me just tell you straight out between us, because I'm going to just run through them rather quickly, because there's no reason to go into it in ridiculous detail. The problem with these sets is that the concerto accompaniments are not always great. Some of them are pretty good, but today we really expect to have violinists who can play the bejesus out of the piece, and conductors and orchestras that really are with them every step of the way, that do really quality work as accompanists. And that's not appreciated. Remember how everybody used to dump on Eugene Ormandy because they would say, oh, he's a wonderful accompanist. Let me tell you something. Eugene Ormandy is an important conductor in the history of music because he raised the level of what an accompanist is supposed to be in the concerto context for everybody. He really did. That's why soloists wanted to play with him, and that's why people listened to that and went, oh, yeah, okay. So, the accompanist is not just sitting there going, oh, like this. And unfortunately, there are quite a few of those in this series. But that doesn't mean that Ricci isn't fabulous. And that's what I mean when I say this is for violin mavens. If you want to listen to the violin and you don't worry too much about what's going on around him, you're in great shape. So let's talk about this. As a collection, first of all, both of these boxes were reviewed in great detail, exquisite detail, I might add, by ClassicsToday.com's Jed Distler. And those are insider box set reviews with sound clips. So if you want to go read the details, which will be much more detailed than what I'm going to go through here, I really suggest that you go and read Jed's comments, because they're entirely apt and 100% correct, as always with Jed, and I'm 10 million % behind them. I agree with them completely. So let's talk about this. First, you get the Four Seasons with the Stradivarius Chamber Orchestra. You know, it's like nothing but Stradivariuses playing the Four Seasons. Okay, next. Then you get the Paganini Violin Concerto No. 2 and the Saint-Saëns Violin Concerto No. 1 with Cincinnati Symphony and Max Rudolph. Those are very good performances. And then the Bach Sonatas and Partitas for solo violin. No. I mean, it's not like we're talking about Ravel's Tzigana. Ugh, that's coming. Don't worry. But no, they're wonderful performances of the sonatas and partitas. They're excellent. And the only issue is how much solo violin music you can tolerate at a time. But to be fair, to be absolutely fair, we know Bach never intended that people listen to these things in the enormous quantity that we have them today. You should listen to one sonata, then take a break, and then maybe one partita, and then take a break. Spread them out. Take your time. I find personally that I get so much more out of the music when I don't overindulge, because it's Bach. Bach's music is very dense. It doesn't matter how many instruments it's written for. You know, the more time you have to savor it and appreciate what Bach is doing, the better it sounds. At least that's how I feel about it. I really do. And I think if people take it seriously, they would actually listen to it less, more carefully. Anyway, so they're wonderful performances. Then you get Sarasate, Spanish dances, introduction in Tarantella, Caprice Basque, the Serenata Andaluza with Brooks Smith. Oh, it's all fun. I love Spanish music, even if it's for the violin. So that's a wonderful record. And then Chrysler stuff. You know, and then an interview with Ruggiero Ricci, which is fun. And The Glory of Cremona. Oh my gosh, all these composers performed on 15 different Cremonese violins. And it's rather fascinating. You do get to hear the difference between one instrument and the next. Are they huge differences? Well, sometimes yes, but most of the time no. And it's a cool little experiment. And then Bravura! Music by Locatelli, Paganini, Ernst, Vecchi, and Wieniawski. Oh, it's mostly junk, but, you know, it's violin virtuoso junk. If you like violin virtuoso junk, you're going to love this, because Ricci was one hell of a virtuoso. And then CD9, which is the last one, it's Violin Plus One. Music by Vivaldi, Saint-Saëns, Paganini, Villa-Lobos, and Prokofiev, with all kinds of other people. Those are the extra one. They're duos of various kinds. So that's the American Decca stuff. And these are stereo recordings, by the way. They were done between 1960 and 1970. And it's really, really fun. The all Stradivarius ensemble playing Vivaldi is, you know, I mean, like I said, this is violin music for violin people. It really, really is. And it's nice that it's out there. It's really kind of fascinating as a niche in our musical culture. Violin culture is a world unto itself. And I think Ricci was one of the great inhabitants of that world, without a doubt. So yes, that's this one. And it's like I said, it's 9 CDs. And if you're not like an insane violin person, you might want to just get that one and not worry about the other box, which is 20 CDs and therefore considerably more expensive. But it does contain most of the concertos and music with orchestra, which of course I like, because then you get to hear something besides the goddamn violin. You know what I mean? So let's look at this one. This next box. These are, by the way, original jackets with beautiful notes. I mean, they're wonderfully put together. It's typical Australian Eloquence typical Australian Eloquence, sorry Cyrus, top quality stuff like they always do. So first you get the Beethoven Violin Concerto and the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto with Adrian Bolt and Malcolm Sargent, dull and duller in terms of the accompaniments, but not Ricci. Ricci really shows them up. He really does. You wonder, you've got such a great violinist playing his heart out, and can't you just like wake up and do something? You want to just slap them around. Then we have Paganini Concertos 1 and 2, which with Anthony Collins and Ernest Ansermet doing Ravel's Zigana. Well, it's done wonderfully well. Let's face it. I mean, he plays it very, very well. And Anthony Collins accompanies well enough. At least he's not doing the complete Sibelius symphonies, thank God. He was an okay accompanist. But, these are mostly monos, by the way, or a lot of them are, because they were done between like 1950 and 60. Then we got Sibelius Violin Concerto. That was the first Sibelius in stereo. And as Jed points out, it was roundly upstaged by the Jascha Heifetz Sibelius Violin Concerto from around the same period. But this is a terrific Sibelius Violin Concerto. And a lot of people don't like Heifetz because they think he was too technically perfect and therefore emotionally sterile, which is, of course, nonsense. But, people say that. But Ricci is, less Heifetz-like, but just as virtuosic, and it's wonderful. And you've got good accompaniment. It's what's his name? Olive Felstad. The guy who does the Grieg Piano Concerto with Clifford Curzon. That guy. Yeah, Fjellstad. Very good conductor, very good accompaniment, really, really decent. And then there's also, let's see, the Cacciatorian Violin Concerto with Anatole Fistulari, and that just nice and schlocky as the music deserves. Then excellent Mendelssohn and Bruch Violin Concertos, Bruch Violin Concerto number 1 with Piero Gamba, first rate. Prokofiev Violin Concertos 1 and 2 with Ansermet. There are better versions of those, I think. But, and Ansermet, as a Prokofievian, was, only so-so with that orchestra, but that's okay. They're nicely done. And then the Lalo Sinfonia Español, which, as Jed points out, is terrific. The Sarasate Carmen Fantasy and Zigeunerweisen and the Saint-Saëns Short Things with Ansermet and Piero Gamba. That's all fun stuff. Just love it. I hate the Lalo, though. Oh, what an awful piece. I've told my Lalo horror story about how I got trapped playing the snare drum in the finale with a Suzuki violinist and her parents snapping photographs of everything she was doing while I was stuck going da 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 schnock da 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 schnock da 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 schnock. Oh, it was a nightmare. Absolutely a nightmare. And then the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto again, and the Dvorak Violin Concerto with Malcolm Sargent. See, here's a case where, Ricci is terrific. He's wonderful, and Sargent is just so average. If he had really dug into the accompaniments in the Dvorak, especially because it was not a well-known piece then, there was Milstein and there were a couple others out, but basically, Joseph Suk, in his earlier ones, you just wish that they had played that music with the fire and passion that Ricci brought to it. You just wish. And, but they're not bad performances. By today's standards, you'll notice the deficiencies in the accompaniments. Mendelssohn and Tchaikovsky. Again, the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Let's see, there was another Mendelssohn here before, wasn't there? Yes. The first one on CD4 is a little bit zippier and I think more lithe and limber than the remake on CD8. And the Tchaikovsky is, again, with Fistulari, he's better, and you've got Swan Lake excerpts with Fournet, which are very, very good. And then CD9 is interesting. It's the Tchaikovsky third and fourth orchestral suites, which have substantial solo violin parts. So it's Ansermet and Suisse Romande, with Ricci providing quite the class act for the solo violin parts. Now, after CD9, we get solo violin stuff. You've got the Paganini Caprices, 2 recordings. I think he made like 5. He made a lot of recordings of the Paganini Caprices. He was the first violinist to play the Paganini Caprices in their original solo form. So he owned the Paganini Caprices, shall we say. Both recordings are extremely fine. You can nitpick things about things like intonation and other things, and I don't, because I never listen to the Paganini Caprices if I can help it. The only one I can stand, basically, is the last one. The last one, the one that has the tune, dum ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum bum bum. That's the one that is really famous. All the rest of them are just, no, they're brilliant little violin showpiece solo things. And I remember all the excitement way, way, way back on LP. When Michael Rabin's version was reissued, which was supposed to be hot stuff. And that was my first version of the Paganini Caprices. And I got them and I plonked it on because it was like, oh, the legendary Michael Rabin, Paganini Caprices. And I'm listening to them and going, oh, it's all solo violin. Kill me now. So what can I tell you? If you like your Paganini Caprices, you got two of them here by a guy who really knew his Paganini Caprices and played them extremely well. Then you have Sonatas for Solo Violin by Bartók, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, and Hindemith. Really fine performances all the way through. The Bach Sonata No. 1 and Partita No. 1. Again, the Weber 6 Sonate Progressif, which are kind of interesting. Nobody does Weber, and he was such a great composer. I love to hear Weber, so I think it was wonderful of Ricci to do them. And then the Richard Strauss Violin Sonata, which is a rarity in the day, and Prokofiev's Violin Sonata No. 2, and then a couple Beethoven sonatas with, what's his name? Oh, who's that pianist? Oh, it's so hard to figure out. Friedrich Gulda, that was his name. That's fun. Fun stuff, right? And then we've got, Brahms, violin sonatas 1 through 3 with Julius Ketchen, famous recordings. A little bit rough and ready, but exciting. And it's nice to see Brahms get his hair mussed once in a while, his beard tangled by a couple real sort of primal animal type soloists who just go for it. Those are fun performances. I like them. And let's see, Brahms Sonatas 2 and 3. Again, this is the 1957 recording. Before it was 1954. Again with Katchen. See, they do them again. And then Sarazate's Spanish dances and a Paganini recital and Virtuoso showpieces, of which there are no shortage on CD20. So that's this big box. And I have to say, it's been years and years and years since I've heard this stuff. I'd never heard all of it. It was really fun. This came out a little while ago. Jed did his reviews like a month or two ago because I really wanted to take my time and listen to it carefully and get to know it again. And I'm very glad that I did. I really am very glad that I did because Ricci was a wonderful, wonderful violinist who sort of existed, in my perception anyway, in the shadow of some of his more illustrious colleagues. And he didn't deserve it. He was as good as any of them. He really was. And so it's wonderful to see this stuff made available again from Australian Eloquence and done with such love and such care. And like I said, if you're a violin maven, just go for it. But if you aren't, then think about it. Think about it very seriously. Keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.